Welcome, our dear viewers, for another episode of our KAS TALKS. I am Angela Marie Mangabang.
And I am John Emmanuel Morales at kami ang inyong kasama.
Kasabay
Kasangguni
sa pagtuklas ng kasagutan
patungkol sa kasaysayan.
Panibagong diskusyon na naman ang magaganap ngayong araw. Ang ating pag-uusapan ay ang kasaysayan ng Pilipinas, particular sa panahon ng pananakop ng Espanya sa pamamagitan ng libro ni Renato Constantino na pinamagatang The Philippines, a Past Revisited from Spanish Colonization to Second World War.
Tatalakayin natin ang kabanata 7 hanggang 9 sa pamamagitan muli ng aming inihandang mga programa para sa isang kapanapanabik na diskusyon na siyang kapupulutan natin ng bagong ideya patungkol sa ating kasaysayan. At upang simulan, narito si Angela para sa GENZ KATAMAD, Kabataang Talakayan para sa Madla.
Para sa episode natin ngayon, pag-aaralan natin kung paano nga ba nakamit nating mga Pilipino ang ating national consciousness or our national identity. However, the story of the attainment of our national identity isn't a story of rainbows and butterflies, but of violence and bloodbath, of struggles and injustices. The People's Rebellion were mostly negative responses to the oppression that is happening during the colonization. And to study these reactions or responses, we must take a look at the two societies during that time, the society of the oppressed and the society of the oppressors. The society of the oppressed, or the natives, were still in the middle of development. Only certain communities were beginning to have class stratification. The society of the oppressor, however, were in the mercantilistic stage of capitalism. So in comparison, the natives were a lot behind the Spaniards when it comes to economical development. Isa rin sa kailangan nating i-take note sa Spanish colonization ay ang union ng state and church. Ito ang isa sa pinaka-importanteng feature ng kanilang administrasyon. As we go further with our discussion, we would find out how this played a major role in the people's experiences of struggles and oppression. When the Spaniards arrived, some natives actually did not pay any mind to it, while some even welcomed them. However, their intrusion to self-sufficient societies made the natives drive them away. Ang mga pinakanaunang nanguna sa pagtaboy sa mga Espanyol ay sila Lapu-Lapu, Lakandula at Suliman, at Salamat at De Legazpi. Tribute, forced labor, and policy of reduction were the major causes of the rebellion of the natives. Dahil sa economic deprivation na dulot ng mga tribute, naisipan ng mga tao na magprotesta gamit ang pagbalik nila sa kanilang dating native religion. Isa itong form ng rejection nila sa Catholic religion na nakikita nilang malaki ang role na ginagampanan sa Spanish rule. So in a sense, they used their old gods or old beliefs to counter the Spanish ones. Isang halimbawa nito si Tamblot, isang babaylan na nagsasabi na nagpakita sa kanya ang isang diwata at nangako na bibigyan ng marangya at mabiyayang buhay ang mga natives kung aatakihin nila ang mga Espanyol at ire-reject ang Catholic religion. The first story was somehow similar. He talked about the conversations he had with the demon who promised the natives that he would help them in various ways if they would reject the Spanish rule and Catholic religion. Tapar also proclaimed himself as God Almighty and even designated among his followers a Christ, a Holy Ghost, and a Virgin Mary, and also popes and bishops. In this development, we see the adaptation of some features of Catholicism. Bukod sa economic deprivation, naging trigger din ang forced labor upang magsimula ang mga native revolt. One example was the resistance in Samar led by Sumuroy, who was ordered by his Babaylan father to kill a priest. This rebellion initiated other many rebellions not only in nearby villages but also in many provinces in northern Mindanao, which resulted to many friars killed and also Spanish government officials. Also, one notable leader of rebellion was Tabao, a cunning Manobo chieftain who led the northern Mindanao by using several smart tricks and using the practices and beliefs of Catholicism into his advantage and had the Spanish garrison wiped out. While the natives were suffering and fighting, the unrest because of the struggles and rebellion happening all over the archipelago made opportunities for the chiefs. They participated in the exploitation processes by the Spaniards, and once they feel the power, they start to crave for more. The middle of 17th century then marks the new stage in native resistance. The Pampangueños were military trained, so when they started a revolt, the Spaniard considered them as formidable enemies. What the Spanish governor did was, besides sending armed forces, was bribing the chief of a riot with rewards to gain his support. Chief Macapagal then turned sides and even went back to a riot to prevent more revolt. The chiefs were discouraged because of his betrayal. They were also envious of his awards. The Spaniards used this strategy so that they can win over the chiefs and offer them privileges in return. While the chiefs were getting greedy, so are the principales. This is evident in the Ilocos and Pangasinan revolt, where both leaders wanted to replace the Spaniards as ruler. This shows the transformation of the principales into an elite class. Another implication worth noting about these revolts were the change of attitude of the natives toward religion. Unlike the earlier ones, this did not result to resurgence of nativism. This could be the start of the attachment of the natives toward the Catholicism. The longest revolt in Bohol, which lasted for 85 years, showed that the Raos had adopted the Catholic religion. They solemnized the weddings, baptized the newborn, etc., even though that it was initiated by anti-religious feelings. However, at the same time, the people were becoming conscious of the economic injustices perpetrated by the church. Uprising occurred in many places in the archipelago. I think this shows that the natives have just grown attached to the Catholic practices, but they can still see the evil roots of the church. The British occupation of Manila in late 1762 added to the unrest in the whole archipelago. However, the provinces took this chance to revolt as the Spanish military showed weakness. Uprisings took place in many parts of the country. Main uprisings were of the Ilocos and Pangasinan. The natives were motivated because they realized that the Spaniards were not invincible after all. The Spaniards also had a hard time as they had to contend two forces. When the uprising were took down after some time, the census after rebellion showed that the population decreased by almost half. Even though the Ilocos revolt only lasted for 5 months, it is worth noting as it shows the prototype of the Ilustrado leadership of the 19th century. Diego Silang, with his Principalia origins and Spanish upbringing, properties of his wife, and his sophistication as a result of his Manila visit, had the right background to emerge as a leader. He was at the right place at the right time, and it is possible that he had been thinking of taking advantage of Spanish defeat to British while he was still in Manila. Silang took advantage of the people's anxiety and restlessness after hearing about the British occupation and Pangasinan revolt, rousing them to make steps to protect themselves from the British, arguing that the Spaniards could no longer protect them. He also stated that this task required the unity of the principales and the common people. Silang was against heavy taxation and abusive Spanish officials, but his demands were reformist rather than revolutionary. However, he moved against his own class, which is the principales, and laid his loyalty for the Spanish king and church. Not long after, however, he also shifted his allegiance and sought the protection of the British. In other words, Silang not only betrayed the natives but also the Spaniards. He betrayed both the oppressed and the oppressors. On the other hand, each uprising was a step towards their political awakening to national consciousness, to national identity. In this chapter, we learn first and foremost that our voices matter. To resist is a right. It is not the injustice that brought our national identity to light, but our resistance or our willingness to fight. Again, this is Angela Marimangabang from GENZ KATAMAD, and next up is John Emmanuel for Chapter 8.
After a long decade of isolation from the Spaniards, other nations such as England and the Chinese started to break the isolation by entering the islands and making Spain their satellite country. But how did it affect the country today? How did it become a significant period of Philippine history? Let's find out in the segment I-solation, a Philippine documentary. Have you ever been to Chinatown or Divisoria? Have you ever thought about why the Chinese are more dominant than our fellow countrymen? Let us take back a flashback moment. The Philippines was not spared and linked to the world capitalist system by Britain, and became in effect an Anglo-Chinese colony flying the Spanish flag, meaning the hidden power of British and Chinese influence just under the Spanish flag. Spanish colonization became a potent stimulus for Chinese immigration to the Philippines. In the beginning of the 7th century, more than 20,000 Chinese resided in Manila and other places. The Chinese therefore became an indispensable and established institution in the Philippines' economic life. Through buying and selling activities, the Chinese became the solvent of barangay society. The economic life of the country became dominated and practically monopolized by the Chinese. They paved the way for the specialization in agriculture. The natives could offer no competition, for they had no capital and little experience in trading ventures. The question is, how do we have a progressive economic life, and how do we join world commerce in the present time? It starts from the infiltrating mercantilist curtain. It means that the British penetration was done secretly, for it was against the Spanish colony to allow rival European power to trade with their colonies. But because the distance of the colony from Spain rendered supervision difficult, the English managed to violate the policy with ease. How funny is that bribery and corruptions are already present. Every single vessel was supplied with precious gifts for the officers of the city. It became a customary practice each time he put it in Manila to call on the Governor General bearing gifts. But how did we really become a participant in world commerce? It was the free trade. As there was economic rethinking, free trade was established. From being a mere outpost of the empire, Philippines became an official participant in world commerce. Philippines had emerged from its isolation. A fundamental transformation of Philippine economic life took place during the period from 1820 to 1870. A national market was emerging. Internal prosperity was noticeable. The economic unification of the country further fostered the rationalization of production. Tobacco became the main crop of the north, sugar the principal product of West Visayas, and avocado the mainstay of the Bicol region. As we compare the past from the present time, we can conclude that the end of isolation from Spaniards helped us to actively participate and economically gain a prosperous life today. Because of the starting ground for free trade, we are now liberated to import and export across the world, as well as we enhance the agricultural industry of our country. But a social transformation happened. As there was a social transformation in the Philippines, then came the Chinese mestizos. They were produced between the union of Chinese men and native women. The Chinese men were encouraging intermarriage with native women since there were very few Chinese women in the Philippines. In 1750, the mestizos were already a recognized and distinct element in Philippine society. By 1810, out of the total population of about 2.5 million, around 120,000 were Chinese mestizos. Around Manila, most mestizos were retail merchants or artisans. They became retailers, wholesalers, and landowners. A fact that wonders why there are many Chinese people around Manila. The economic position of the Chinese mestizo provided them with a social status that allowed them to take the leadership of the emerging Filipino society. In the late 19th century, various land laws were implemented, which provide for an easy way of registering land and obtaining title, not only confirmed the ownership and legally defined the boundaries of lands granted by the king or bought from the public domain, but unfortunately also gave legal sanction to land grabbing. The Royal Decree of February 13, 1894, better known as the Mara Law, gave landholders only 1 year within which to secure legal titles to their land. After the deadline, untitled lands were deemed forfeited. How unfair to the people who are not aware. As we view to this present time, land grabbing still exists. This interview from Oxfam GB will illustrate how land grabbing evolved today's generation.
May batas po na hindi pwedeng i-convert ang agricultural sa industrial. Dati, itong dulo nito ay sakahan. Ngayon, kinonvert nila nga dito sa housing. Kasi po, masasaran na kami. Pag malakas po ang ulan, lalo't aabuti ng 3 araw, lubog kami dito.
We can see that the agricultural land today are starting to decrease its hectares due to the government projects or for converting into housing.
Itinanong sa mga tao, sa mga barangay, kung ito ba ang kaunlaran ito ay gusto nila. Basta na lang sinabi sa amin, sa mga karatig barangay na ito na, tanggapin ninyo itong batas na ito.
Kaya gano'n na lang ang pinaglalaban namin, yung karagatan namin at ang lupa ang ninuno.
The economic transformation of the Philippines in the 18th and 19th centuries saw the development of new classes and the alteration of old ones. The interrelated phenomena of land grabbing and commercialization of the economy modified the class structure of Philippine society. The new Principalio was born through a system of economic alliances, and intermarriage became a provincial, and later on, a national force. The question is, what if we are still dependent to Spain? Are we still living in a country of an undeveloped economy? Or we can thrive as we are capable for development independently? That is all for today. This is John Emmanuel Morales. I-solation, a Philippine documentary. Hello guys, for the last part of our webinar, we will have a game called Guess the Word in 4 Pics. Please comment your answer with the hashtag KAS Sagutan. Despite the struggles and inequality our native faces during the Spanish colonization, the Filipinos are not stopped by those hindrances and are capable to resist such strong power. Hint for all the guessing words are all related to Chapter 9, Progress and Protest. So let's start the game. Guess the word in 4 pics. The first word to guess is this. I will give you 5 seconds to comment on your answer. Yay! We have a winner! The correct answer is Constitution. But what is the relation of the word Constitution? The resistance to the Napoleonic invasion produced the Cadiz Constitution of 1812, were a typical liberal bourgeois document described as a constitution written by freemen to set men free. This constitution extended the rights of man not only to Spaniards in the peninsula, but also to all subjects of Spain. However, the reactionary monarch abrogated the Cadiz Constitution and reimposed a regime of absolutism which should have a significant repercussion in the Philippines. Because of the behavior of the Spaniards, the mounting resentment erupted revolt. The people directed their anger against the principales. The common people refused to believe regarding the news as a fabrication by the higher class and by the Spaniard in order to deprive them of their rights. They vowed their vengeance on all principales. They assaulted the town hall and freed prisoners. This revolt proves that the Filipinos are capable to resist such power even at an early age. But since the religion is still sided with the upper class, they are holding whether to choose their vengeance or keep their faith in the church. For the next word to guess, again, I will give you 5 seconds to comment on your answer. Okay, we have another winner. Congrats, Ira. Yes, you got it right. The correct answer is Hermano Pule. But who is Hermano Pule? Why did he become a significant person in this chapter as well as in Philippine history? The frustration from acquiring equal rights became the root cause of another revolt in the southern Tagalog region. Hermano Pule, also known as Apolinario de la Cruz, went to Manila in 1839 hoping to join a monastic order, but he failed because he was a native. Pule and his followers became insurgent in their attitude towards both the church and the state, after the church refused to recognize his fraternity. Pule was hailed as the king of the Tagalogs. After the provincial authorities pressed by the friars known as the Movement of Pule, they request the military capture Pule and his aide, named Purgatoria. After a hasty trial, they were both executed. He was only 27 years old then. The suppression of Pule's revolt had its repercussions in Manila, where soldiers from Tayabas attacked Fort Santiago. For me, I think this was the starting point where the Filipinos are ready to fight for their rights. We might not always heard the name of Hermano Pule, but because of their movement, the resistance from the Spaniards intensified and somehow ended the 333 long years of Spanish rules through the Philippine Revolution.
And now, for the third round, I'll be flashing the 4 pictures and it's your time to tweet your answers. I'll be giving 5 seconds for you to answer. And time's up! We have a winner! Congratulations, user Ameya. And yes, the correct answer is economic development. Now, how is economic development relevant for our discussion for today? The economic development, which had its initial impetus in the 1750s, had drastically impacted not only the local but also the foreign sector. Local sectors suffered greatly, especially the masses. The export crop economy made Philippines began to suffer rice shortage. From rice exporting country, it became an importer of rice. Export crops were profitable to landowner and traders, but it caused hunger to common people. Dahil dito, ang mga magsasaka na nagtatanim ng ating pagkain ay siyang mga nagugutom at walang makain. The entry of English textiles also destroyed the local weaving industry. Dahil mas mura ang mga ini-import na textile, hindi nakaka-compete ang ating mga traditional weaving regions. Dahil din dito, ang mga local materials ay naging luxuries na ang mga mayayaman lang ang nakaka-afford. While the local sector suffered, it is the opposite to be said about the foreign sector, particularly the British and America. By 1898, all major commercial nations had agents in Manila. Around 300 Europeans virtually monopolized the import-export trade. Besides the economic lifestyle of the people, the economic development also brought changes in our cultural aspect. Wealth made Chinese mestizos and urbanized natives be able to acquire education and Spanish culture. In addition, the education reforms of 1863 not only improved the standards of education in primary level, but also opened the doors of higher institutions for learning to many natives. Now they could study law, medicine, or pharmacy. These now educated young men became disseminators of Spanish culture and of liberal thought later on. In summary, economic development brought cultural changes by educational reforms which later on became the bridge for liberal ideas. However, as we can notice, even though we are talking about liberalism, only the young men or the male students were being mentioned in this narrative. This means that this liberalism or liberal thought were restricted to only men, and not really completely liberal. And now for the fourth word, we are now going to flash the 4 words for you to guess on. Five seconds is up. Now we have a winner. Congratulations to user Angge. And yes, the correct answer is Philippinization of clergy. Hindi nagtatapos ang laban ng Pilipino para sa equality. Isa sa manifestations nito ay ang demand for Philippinization of the clergy. Quarry over parish assignments and supervisory had been going for a long time, but it hardly involved native priests. With economic development, however, the number of native priests increased as they can now afford to let their sons be educated and enter priesthood. The priesthood was all short-handed due to the expulsion of Jesuits in 1768. The policy of desecularization directly affected the native priests. The return of Jesuits and consequent reallocation of missions further deprived the nation priest of parishes. Even though the Filipinos were just asking for equality, the Spaniards once again played dirty and took advantage of the incident of Cavite 1872 mutiny to accuse Fathers Jose Burgos, Mariano Gomez, and Jacinto Zamora of being the leaders of the Cavite conspiracy. They were arrested, given mock trial, and publicly garroted. Having priests on their side also helped the natives because it meant that fighting friars did not mean denying their Catholic faith since they had Catholic priests on their side. They felt relief. Between 1872 and the outbreak of the Philippine Revolution, a generation of ilustrados came of age. They started articulating to people the resentment that motivated centuries of struggle. Ang lahat ng mga pangyayaring ito, lahat ng sakripisyo, lahat ng rebelyon ng ating mga ninuno, ang dahilan kung bakit natatawag natin ang sarili natin ngayon na Pilipino. Kung kaya't ang pagtanggi sa kasaysayan ay katulad din ng pagtanggi sa ating pagkakakilanlan. Sabi nga sa huling linya ng pahinang ito, the nation was born of the revolution as much as the revolution was the expression of the nation being born. Ayun lamang at naway marami kayong natutunan sa episode natin ngayon ng KAS Talks. Kami si Mangabang at Morales, ang inyong kasama, kasabay, kasangguni sa pagtuklas ng kasagutan patungkol sa kasaysayan.